I lost my brother last month, my younger brother, and a couple of years ago, he and I attended a ceremony just like this, and one of the recipients had a PowerPoint and spoke for somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour. If he were here tonight, he would tell me, no PowerPoint, and keep this a little short. I think the over and under at my daughter's wedding was 15 minutes for my toast, and I went over. But as I told everybody, I paid for it. I'm going to say talk as long as I want. In 1859, Charles Dickens wrote one of our famous classic novels, The Tale of Two Cities. The opening line of this great piece of literature said, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times." In many ways, that single line graphically describes my growing up in Mount Ayr. I'm often amused at an Instagram post I see periodically that asks, "Check here if you've had a friend for more than 7 years." Bob Burrell and I met over 70 years ago when we both entered kindergarten here. Bob has been much more traveled than I. He's lived in Texas, Florida, and many years in Denver before recently moving back to Ames. Throughout it all, we have stayed in touch, rarely have gone very long without having some type of communication. I'm a little concerned that he's moved back to Ames. That may be a little too close. So check in with me periodically to see if we're still friends. It was the best of times because we all spent our early youth in a place we called Dogtown. This was our daycare. All of our mothers worked. They always knew where to find us. And at noon when the whistle blew, we came home for lunch. And at 6 when it blew again, we came home for supper. Maybe the highlight of those early years was when the Mount Ayr Little League All-Stars beat the Creston, that big city up the road, All-Stars in their 16-team invitational Pee Wee baseball tournament. Pat Irving talked about this last month at the Celebration of Life for my brother Alan, who was on the team along with myself, Bruce Henderson, Dwayne Miller, Kenny Markley, Tom Kelly, just to name a few. We were a ragtag bunch playing in the championship game against Creston in their nice uniforms, while we were in our blue jeans, our t-shirts, saying we were the Mount Ayr White Sox, and some saying we were the Mount Ayr Indians, because there weren't enough t-shirts to go around. Final game was scheduled for 5 innings, actually ended up going 9 innings before we finally won. Then there was no place to put the trophy, so they ended up putting it in the Horns Rec Hall, where my mom worked. And then after they got tired of it being there, it went to Lefty's Tavern. And where it went from there, we don't know. It was the worst of times a few years later when one of our closest friends on that team, Donnie Horn, was killed in a car wreck. Pat Irving, his brother Tim, Alan, and myself were asked to travel to Coon Rapids, Iowa, and be pallbearers at the funeral. We were all scared, we all grew up a little too fast on that day. High school was the best of times. I was fortunate to be surrounded by some truly great athletes. I might get myself in trouble here by naming a few names, but the 3 best that I would call were Jerry Waugh, Gene Ricker, and Dwayne Miller. I was hesitant to put Miller on this list after he stole Janice Caldwell from me. And then was her date when she was the homecoming queen in 1964. Best team I was ever on had to be the 1963 Raider football team. And by the way, that team and all 3 of those gentlemen are already members of this Hall of Fame. It was the worst of times, and that our home life was often not very pleasant. I believe my father, who served in World War II, suffered from what we would call today PTSD. He was without a doubt an alcoholic. He was very violent, extremely abusive to my mother and to my brother and I. We didn't talk about it. We thought if we didn't talk about it, it would get better. It didn't. Nobody talked about things like that. It was a surprise about 40 or 50 years later when Bob Burl and I talked that we had some of the same problems with our fathers. When I was 20, I was asked to appear in front of the Ringo County Sanity Board and have my father committed to a mental hospital in Clarinda. One of the scariest times of my life was visiting him in that facility and seeing him strapped into a bed and screaming out of his head. He died at the age of 52 from what was called cardiac arrest, but we all knew it was from the alcohol. Through it all, my mother endured. So I may not have had much direction from my father, but it was the best of times because there were people ready and willing to step up and fill that role. Vance Geiger, our high school principal, Joe McNeil, who was the 1963 Iowa High School Football Coach of the Year, and Chet Rode were three who did it very well. And all three of them are in this Hall of Fame. My Uncle Gene Hannon and my Aunt Barbara, who lived in Bedford, were also very influential in my life. Barbara, who is 92, traveled here for this ceremony tonight from Denver. And by the way, both she and Gene are in the Bedford Hall of Fame. The entire Hannon family completed the role of parent whenever necessary. I had 3 aunts who worked in the bank. And to best explain the role that they filled would maybe be this story. So Royce Davis was the president of the bank. That's Marilyn Sable's father, for those of you who don't know. And on a visit back home in 1974, I drove by Andy Johnson's Chevrolet. Sitting in the window was an orange Corvette. I drove by a couple of times and finally got the courage to go in and ask if I could drive it. Keep in mind, I was 26 years old, graduated from college, served 2 years in the military. Very important, I was single, and was gainfully employed as a teacher, making what seemed like a lot of money, probably around $10,000 a year. I decided that I had to have that car, and so I went to the bank and walked into Mr. Davis's office and explained my wishes. He asked me a few questions, proceeded to put a loan document into his manual typewriter, and began typing up the loan. While this was going on, my oldest aunt, Veronica, or Frony as we called her, walked into the office. Uninvited, by the way. "What are you doing, Barry?" she asked. "I'm trading cars," I very cockily told her. "I don't think you need to trade cars. You have a car." Now what I had was the 1972 Chevrolet 4-door Impala that was kind of a two-tone brown. Without a doubt, the ugliest car I would ever own. It was the only car that was available for me to purchase when I returned out of the service and resumed my teaching and coaching position at Adair Casey. Now, one of my jobs in that program was that I ran the Little League program, and the baseball diamond was in Casey, so one of my jobs was taking the Adair kids from Adair to Casey every day for practice and then bringing them back. Sometimes I'd have maybe 10 or 12 8-year-olds in my car. Something that would drive every school administrator crazy today, but that's, that was what we did. So that Corvette probably wasn't going to work very well, even with the top down. So my aunt says to me, "What are you trading for?" "The Corvette," I said, with kind of an air of arrogance that probably really pissed her off. "No, you're not," she replied. "Yes, I am. You don't need a Corvette, and that would just be stupid." I was very upset with her, and then shocked when I turned and looked at Mr. Davis as he pulled the loan document out of the typewriter, slowly tore it in half, and said, "Well, Barry, I guess you're not." Was the closest I ever came to owning a Corvette. I'd not be here today if it were not for many people, a lot of them who are here tonight. But I've been blessed, and it would be terrible of me if I did not mention a couple. Of course, my mother heads up the list, but here tonight is Roger Underwood, also has to be mentioned. He convinced me to leave the education business when I had no background, no training, and joining in the local bank in Guthrie Center he had just purchased. We had similar backgrounds, that he was a former teacher and coach, and we came from similar financial backgrounds, which was none. He also convinced me to take a $15,000 cut in pay, which he promised to make up with a bonus at the end of the year. So married with a 2-year-old and a baby, my exorbitant salary of $36,000 a year as the high school principal and athletic director dropped to $21,000. This was 1984. If you know anything about agricultural history in Iowa, you will know that it was a terrible time to buy a bank and a worse time to go to work for a bank. There was no bonus at the end of the year. The statement he made that convinced me to make this switch was, though, I don't think I have somebody that'll say no to me, and I think sometime I may need that. Now think about this. Somebody has just bought a bank in a community, and they're looking for somebody that might say no to him. Through it all, he's remained a great partner for 40 years, and more important, a great friend. And he's a member of the Simpson College Hall of Fame, and more important, a member of the Guthrie Center Fast Pitch Softball Hall. Let me conclude with a few more things about my mom. She's the number one reason I'm able to be here. She kept us in line. She worked her butt off in multiple jobs. We weren't smart enough to really appreciate what she did for us. Monday through Friday, she was at Horns Rexall. At night, she worked at the Princess Theater taking tickets. On Sundays, she was a hostess at the Shamrock Cafe. She wrote me a letter every day while I served in the Army. Every day. She was abused, she was beaten, she was raped, she was humiliated, and the list goes on. Despite it all, she tried to keep the family together. She failed. She fought cancer for over 20 years and finally gave in. Through it all, she loved Mount Airy. I tried to convince her once late in life to move to Guthrie Center, and it would be easier for me to help her. Why in the world would I do that? I have plenty of friends here. This is my home. It was the best of times, however, because there were so many people in Mount Airy who supported her. Helen Terry, Edna Jones, Belle Burrell, Jeannie Willie, Sue and Mel Perry, James and Marilyn Sable, and many others were always there when she needed the help. No place in our society for any type of domestic abuse, and yet it continues every day. I'm very honored and humbled to be selected for this very prestigious group. I was shocked when Sean handed me the letter as I prepared to announce at that track meet that day. But I would not be here without the numerous friends who have supported me and been there for me, many who are here tonight. I have 2 wonderful children, a wonderful son-in-law, now 2 wonderful grandchildren. When I hit a bump in my life that led to a divorce, I was very lucky to meet a new partner, and with her came 3 more children and 8 more grandchildren. It's been the best of times. I ask when you leave here tonight that you not worry about remembering me, but the next time you see someone in a domestic abusive situation, you think of Betty and reach out in some way and try and help. It won't be easy. You'll probably be told to mind your own business, but you may save a life. My mom would be upset that she could not be here tonight. Exercising one of her most frequent pastimes, bragging on her sons. Thank you, Betty. Thank you, Mount Airy.